It stretches for more than 1,000 miles, from Trieste in the west to Constantia in the east. A crack across the landscape, a San Andreas fault in history. It's where Europe split in the 4th century, when the Roman and Byzantine empires divided, and again in the 11th century, when Christian faced Muslim on the road to Jerusalem. It's where the Spanish and Austrian Habsburg lands parted, and where the German speakers of Northern Europe struggled for dominion over the German speakers of the South. It was where Woodrow Wilson drew one line in 1918, and Joseph Stalin another in 1945. Sometimes it's marked by the Danube, and sometimes by the Carpathians. And sometimes it falls across a city street, marked only by hatred and hidden landmines.
I can't remember now where I got the idea. Perhaps it was here at the Café Greensteidl, opposite Vienna's Imperial Palace, 25 years ago. I was making a film with Michael Frayn, and the two of us were trying at the same time to decipher the history of Imperial Vienna and the menu. There was a fish on offer. I think it was called Goldbarsch. And Michael asked, in his better German, whether it was a sea fish or a freshwater fish. Leider haben wir hier kein Seefisch, came the reply. And when the elderly waitress admitted that Vienna was bereft of sea fish, there was all the melancholy of the loss of imperial greatness. Now she was referring to the Slovenian and Croatian coast, which was of course the bargain choice in those days for Adriatic package holidays, and innocent of such names as Slobodan Milosevic and Franjo Tuđman. Yugoslavia, invented by the Treaty of Trianon after the First World War to park the problems that had been the casus belli, once upon a Habsburg time, was simply where Franz Josef parked his navy.
The 20th century has been such a catastrophe because in eliminating the Austro-Hungarian Empire, you create, it's like a surgeon going in and taking out the stomach and liver and pancreas. You create a huge cavity.
Habsburg Empire was able to give its inhabitants the feeling of being a citizen. And even the poorest peasant somewhere knew about Franz Joseph. He was very popular. It was a feeling of there's a chance to be heard, that you get justice. And that's something very fundamental.
When I came to Bosnia in the beginning of the war, in 93, I was told, we Muslims don't have a country other than the Habsburg Empire to look to as our friendly outside land. The Serbs have got Serbia and the Croatians have Croatia, but we really look to the Habsburg Empire. I thought, this is pretty queer.
Too much of social reality was ignored, and too much this ideal Europe or this ideal world was constructed around very egoistical needs of very small groups.
When I returned to England, the thought of the empire that used to be nagged away in my mind. I began to read history books, essays, novels, anything, trying to build up a picture of the place as it must have been. Most of all, I read the sad, ironic novels of Josef Roth, an Austrian Jew who chronicled the last days of the Kaiser's empire and then took himself off to Paris in the 30s, just ahead of the Third Reich, where he drank himself to death. His masterpiece is Radetzky March. It tells the story of 3 generations of Austro-Hungarian gentry: a grandfather, ennobled for an accidental act of heroism at the Battle of Solferino, a son who's a Viennese civil servant, and a grandson who's an unwilling junior officer posted to the dustier corners of the Habsburg fiefdoms. One day I decided I'm going to take trains through Transylvania and drink coffee in other, grubbier cafes across the street from crumbling opera houses. So here I am, back in a city I've got to know rather well over the last 25 years, trying to find out what allowed one family to hold sway over such an enormous empire for more than 3 centuries. Well, they certainly had one thing. They had an army. And Franz Josef built an enormous museum here in the city's arsenal to celebrate it. It looks more like a cathedral than a museum, with high vaulted arches with golden decorations. And there, at the top of the staircase leading up into the museum, is a bust of the emperor himself, with his usual side whiskers, and a plaque above it saying, "To the Emperor Franz Josef I, from his loyal army."
Every soldier, every non-commissioned officer, every officer, of course, knew that he was part of this great organization, and he had some personal relations to the emperor.
Dr. Manfred Rauchensteiner, director of the Military History Museum.
He belonged to the emperor much more than an average citizen not serving in the army.
You can see what it meant to be the Habsburg emperor when you walk through the first room in this museum. Here on the wall are the promulgation papers for Count Radetzky, bestowing high military honor upon him. It's made out in the emperor's name. No, it's made out in all the emperor's names. Franz Josef, Emperor of Austria, King of Hungary, King of Bohemia, King of Lombardy and Venice, Dalmatia, Croatia, Slovenia, Lodomeria, Galicia, Prince of the Seven Towns, and so on, and so on, and so on, all made out in smug Gothic lettering.
Well, I don't think the Habsburgs themselves really had a sense of what their empire constituted right up until the late 19th century, because it starts off as the eastern edge of the German Empire. Then they find themselves with 2 empires. Looking to the west, Janus faced towards Germany. They always saw themselves as ethnic Germans, the Habsburg family did. And then looking towards what was a larger empire beyond the Holy Roman Empire into the Balkans.
That was the historian Dr. Charles Ingrau, and the empire he describes was a potent multicultural cocktail of more than 12 nationalities and almost 20 languages and dialects. After the end of the Napoleonic Wars, it spread to the borders of Russia and the shores of the Adriatic and Black Seas, most of all during the breathtakingly long reign of Franz Josef, from 1848 to the Great War. His first prime minister was Prince Schwarzenberg, whose great-great-great-grandson still ponders matters of state in his eponymous palace across the road from the imperial court.
One should have had the courage, which nobody had then, to find a completely new form, a real federation of all its nations. But of course there were national interests, there were class interests, let's put it quite bluntly. One has to see this too, and so it didn't realize.
But this is what I've come here to see. It's a rather splendid open-topped motor car from the early years of the last century. It's looking a bit the worse for wear. It needs a little attention to the bodywork, because if you look around the back, you can see 3 bullet holes in the side. The man responsible was a young Serbian fanatic called Gavrilo Princip, and he fired the starter's pistol which launched the First World War.
It was a Sunday when Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie came to Sarajevo, and Franz Ferdinand participated in maneuvers, and his wife meanwhile spent some holidays in Bosnia. Therefore it was decided that on June 28th the couple should go to Sarajevo. When they moved to the city, there was a first attempt to assassinate the Archduke. This failed. This was an attempt with a hand grenade. And now the decisive movement started, and the car driver went wrong. When the car reversed back, an additional Serbian nationalist, Gavrilo Princip, could shoot on a distance of 2-3 meters, and he hit with 2 bullets the Sophie and the Archduke.
Over the entrance to the museum are the letters KK, KK for the German Kaiser und König, king and emperor. And of course, Kaka has another meaning. The childish word for excrement provided the satirical novelist Robert Musil with an epithet for empire, Kakania. We're on a journey through the kingdom of crap.
This is where our journey begins, at the Südbahnhof, Vienna's southern station. And it's a grave disappointment. There are no countesses in fur coats bidding fond farewells to their lovers. There are no station announcements. There isn't even a man waiting at the end of the platform to tear our tickets. This is one of the stations that was destroyed by the British at the end of the war. The only reminder of its original imperial destiny is this winged lion underneath the departure board. It's also a reminder of the original purpose of the railways. It says that the lion has been preserved from the original station as a symbol of the connection between Vienna and Venice. When this station was built, the Veneto and Lombardy were both parts of the Habsburg Empire. This is our train, the Klagenfurt train, and at least it's got a little bit of romance in its name. It's called the Terra Mystica. Nothing very mystical about the journey so far. Out of the Südbahnhof, through the tidy suburbs, and into the comfortable woody landscape of Lower Austria. I'm following the Kaiser's route to the empire's only coastline: Istria, Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia. We're travelling through the Weinviertel, the wine-growing district to the south of Vienna, and the geometric armies of vines march towards the horizon, past the neat little churches. There's nothing very imperial about this train. Like his great rival Kaiser Bill, Franz Josef was compelled to rule his Reich from the railways. They used to sing the song in Berlin, Heil dir in Siegenkranz, Hail to thee in victor's laurels, to the words, Heil dir in Sonderzug, Hail to thee in special train. Why am I taking this journey? Perhaps it's the border crossings. We're scheduled to travel through 11 checkpoints to match the 11 nations of the old empire. My family comes from the east, from the Jewish Pale of Settlement in what's now the Ukraine and Belarus, just over the frontier with the Tsar's empire. They crossed many borders in the early pogrom-ridden years of this century to get to Britain. So possibly it's in the genetic memory. I'll let you know when I get to Lvov, where I have a date with that other border crosser, Josef Rod. In the meantime, I'm on my way to Klagenfurt. When I planned this trip, I never intended to stop over in Klagenfurt. But then, the capital of Carinthia acquired fresh notoriety. Klagenfurt is governed by the Freedom Party and its attention-seeking right-wing leader, Jörg Haider. I can see why Carinthia is known for its conservatism. We're following a succession of riverbeds between the southeastern extension of the Alps. Rivers called the Mur and the Bruch and the Drau. On the more distant peaks, you can still see snow, even in late May. The view out of the window is like an unbroken travelogue. It's a succession of carefully tended villages kneeling politely at the foot of cute white churches. Grass looks as if it's been cut with nail scissors. I'm beginning to feel underdressed. My companions in the carriage don't seem too concerned about the scenery. They're busy with their mobile phones and their newspapers.
I can't imagine how the Kaiser ever managed this journey without a laptop. The music you're listening to was written just on the other side of those hills. Gustav Mahler's summer house was at Meiernich, just outside Klagenfurt. It was his escape from the conspiratorial hell of the Vienna court opera.
What do you do when you arrive in a new town? You check into your hotel, you find somewhere to eat, and you wander into the town centre to get the feel of the place. Where is everybody? It's 10 o'clock on a balmy evening. The Baroque buildings have been prettily restored. The zinc tables are set out on the cobbled streets and everybody's packing up for the night. The waitress has just told me it's past closing time. The place is virtually deserted. Downtown Klagenfurt is so respectable that its citizens are all safely tucked up for the night. That's more like it. Klagenfurt is up early and about its business. Earlier than me today, all the bells in the town steeples were competing with each other to murder sleep. This is as far as you can get from urban Vienna. This is a rural Austria, and out in the Neue Platz, they're busily promoting local rural produce. There's a hardboard cow with rubber udders that you can compete to see how fast you can milk. This is also the kind of Austria that Jörg Haider wants to get back to. The Deutsche Nation. I sought out his cultural advisor, Andreas Mülzer, to guide me through the brave old world of Freedom Party Carinthia.
Es gibt drei große Sparten aus unserer Sicht. Es gibt also die klassische, kulturhistorisch gesicherte Kunst.
There are three main partners in artistic heritage. Firstly, the classic arts, theatres, museums, opera, etc. Secondly, the avant-garde, the contemporary arts. And thirdly, folk culture. There isn't a great deal of money to support all three parts. Obviously, they've agitated politically, but it's easy to understand that the artists of the ultra-left haven't received much support from Haider.
So don't go to the Freedom Party for financial support if you write action poetry like Victor Roge.
Marionettenregierung. Oh, Schüssel. Und Co. Satanweiche.
This is what really annoys Herr Mülzer. I'm in a cathedral, or at least it sounds like a cathedral, but it's actually dedicated to the patron saint of modern architecture, Adolf Loos. It's a tall, white building. It's an art gallery and a cafe. It has only one work of art in it, and that's in the window, and the rest of it is an empty space. The work of art consists of photographs taken from a newspaper of the cabinet elected a year ago here in Austria, and all of the members of the cabinet have forelocks and moustaches, which may remind you of an American comedian in the silent movies, or they may remind you of somebody else. To one side is a photograph of Haider with swastikas all over his face. And because it's a transparent work of art, I can look through the window at a Kaiser yellow hotel on the other side of the road, in which Hitler gave a famous speech in 1938. It's called the Café Om, and the person responsible for it is Bella Ban.
For me, this Café Om is exterritorial. It's a special room of spirit. We don't put any pictures here, because for me this room is one picture to keep it. But now, in this political situation, which Austria is now, it is a sign from us, artists, to make a still protest against the government, against the participation of the Freedom Party in our government.
There's now a society of radical artists and students in Klagenfurt, formed to combat the reactionary climate, which goes under the name of Unicum.
The reaction of, especially in the last 1.5 years, from the official cultural policy is not positive. We are an organization that is or has been subsidized by the government, federal government, by the local regional government, and by the city. And in fact, this year, this is the first time since Jörg Haider has become cultural minister, and he has taken the decision to cut short the subsidies for the Unicum, like for 100%. And this is the very strong impact and influence that and reaction that we have had from the official establishment.
One of Jörg Haider's MPs in the Vienna Parliament is Count Peter Gudenus.
It can be that there was a change, that some artists from the left didn't get any longer their subventions, and now someone from the right came. Why not? Culture would be much more flourishing if more persons could get some help.
Do you think it is right that the government should decide who to give the money to on the grounds of their politics?
In Carinthia was a big change, also after many years. It was governed by red social democratic leaders, so the culture was very much influenced by this idea, and the personalities were very much influenced by it, so it's good for a change as well. Not only the politicians should change, also sometimes artists, if they got their money by the country and by the state.
Here in Carinthia, the main political issue until 10 years ago was the so-called question of the Slovenian minority. It didn't matter if it was the Social Democratic Party, if it was the Conservative or the Freedom Party. They were all German Carinthians, you know, and they just didn't like the Slovenes, and they told us to.
There is still a small Slovenian minority in Carinthia. You'd be hard-pressed to detect its presence in the history section of the town museum. The collection leaps from the Romans to the Middle Ages, leaving out altogether the Slavs, who lived here until they called in the Bavarians to sort out the invaders from the east. There are no Slovenian artifacts or costumes in the ethnography section, just good, solid German stuff. So I asked Dr. Marianne Sturm, who is a representative for the Slovenian minority, to bring me out here to the monument to the Slovenes deported by the Nazis in the Second World War.
This part of the history of Austria and special Carinthia is a history where the people don't speak about it. It's a taboo theme, because there were many people from Carinthia who organized this deportation. So we have two societies in Carinthia. The one society is the society of the victims of the Second World War, mainly the Slovenes, but others, because there are also Jews who were deported and killed, really. And the other part is the part who take part in the Second World War on the side of the Nazi movement, and they are still today thinking, oh, it was okay to be there, we have done our duties.
I noticed that there are other invisible things about the Slovene or Slav history of this place. When I went to the museum this morning, I could see exhibits of Roman times and I could see exhibits of Gothic times, but I couldn't see anything in between. What happened in between?
Look, we are still here in a region with a history of national battles and national movements. The Austrian-Hungarian Empire broke down, and new states were established, and therefore in the year 1920 there was held a referendum about this question, and 60% of the people voted for the Austrian state. But also Slovenes voted for the Austrian states, because the Austrian state said, okay, you will have all rights, all national, cultural, linguistic rights. And on the other side, Yugoslavia, the new Yugoslavia, it was again a monarchy, and the people have had experience with the monarchy, so they wanted to live in a social republic. Therefore, the people voted for Austrian. But the Austrian government, especially the Carinthian government, didn't realize what they have promised.
There are few communities, I'm sure they have a bigger number of Slovenians, but they are spread around the country. One doesn't know too much how many they are. And still now they get very much money and help, especially by the Dr. Haider. Dr. Haider made it possible that the Corinthian anthem was translated to Slovenian, so they can think together. It was him who made this. It's not a very, you can't count it in shillings or euro or what it is, but I think it's a very big symbol that our party give them small nationalities and try to give them the rights they have to get to be able to follow, say, the culture.
Klaus Koch of Vienna's Institute for Eastern European Studies takes a more sanguine view of the threats posed by the Freedom Party.
Foreigners always want to hear what happens now with the poor minorities in Austria. Nothing happens with them. And for example, the Slovenes in Carinthia, Haider is, years ago, leads the government of Carinthia. The relations to Slovenia are pretty good. Nothing has changed.
There is an impression in Western Europe that the Freedom Party is opposed to a multicultural Austria. Is this a misunderstanding?
Nein, es ist kein Missverständnis. Es ist so, die Freiheitlichen sind eine identitäre Partei.
No, it's not a misunderstanding. It's simply that the Freedom Party is a party of identity, the burgeoning cultural identity of the Austrian people.
Dieser Slogan, das trivialer parteipolitischer Slogan Österreich zuerst, deutet darauf hin.
Our slogan, Austria First, simply means that we're pursuing a self-defining society.
Ist etwas Schützenswertes.
Our goal is not to sell out to a multicultural society, an immigration-based society.
Eine Migrationsgesellschaft, eine Zugewanderungsgesellschaft. Das ist das eine.
The Austrian nation means a multicultural and multi-ethnic nation. So, and therefore, in the last years, I think that the Austrian politics are beginning to protect this level of the Austrian nation, and they are saying, okay, we must protect the Austrian minorities because they are part of the Austrian nation. But I think the future development will bring a more open society in Austria, because the young people, they want to have a bigger Europe, they want to communicate in this Europe, they are speaking more languages. So I think on the long run, I think the Austria will get an open society and a tolerant society.
Reassuring words from Marianne Sturm. And it's difficult to feel that the Freedom Party is any more threatening than some of our own more loose-tongued conservatives. When the EU censured Austria because of Haider, his poll ratings rose. Now that he's no longer front-page news, the ratings have fallen again, and Klagenfurt is drifting back into its normal, complacent torpor.
Ja, aber das will mehr als 20 Minuten dauern, weil wir haben ein bisschen zu tun.
Wir haben eine Stunde, das macht nichts.
Bitte, ja. Danke.
Danke. My last meal in Austria, in the railway buffet at Klagenfurt, and now it's time for my first frontier. The train we're about to catch is bound for the Slavic southwest, but we're not stopping in Slovenia or Croatia, not yet. We're bound for Italy, for the western end of the Faultline. Because when Europe cracked in half in 1918, a tiny bit of the Slovenian coastline ended up stuck to the old Habsburg provinces of the Veneto and Alto Adige. As a slice of territory, it's not very important, but as a piece of logistics, it's absolutely crucial.
Trieste is squeezed between Austria, Italy and Slovenia at the neck of the Adriatic. It was the empire's only defence against Napoleon and Risorgimento Italy, and it was also the only place where it could base its very substantial fleet.
We've made good time to the Italian border, but things have slowed up a little here at Villa Opicina. A long hiatus while the Italian border guards run a computer check by walkie-talkie on most of the passengers, spelling out every name in city acronym: Milano, Aquila, Roma, Klagenfurt, Savona. 45 minutes before all the checks are run. A hangover, I guess, from the old days before the breakup of Yugoslavia, when guest workers hopped the borders into Italy and Germany. And indeed, this train is a veritable United Nations. There's a Scot down the corridor on his way back from Bosnia to visit a friend in Turin. He's been working with the aid agencies in Republika Srpska. A young Romanian woman whose husband lives in Italy. Having been climbing for most of this journey, we're now dropping down from the Yugoslavian Alps. We're descending through hills peppered with terracotta roofs and bisected by sleek autostrade into one of the great natural harbours of the Adriatic, Trieste, the answer to a landlocked Kaiser's prayers. Now, where are we? If I'm to believe what the station tells me, we're in Austria. It's stolidly Viennese in design, and the colour is reassuringly yellow. A few hundred yards on in the Piazza Veneto, I'm not so sure. The architectural style certainly leans north and east. It's confident mid-19th century commercial, which is not surprising as the two biggest buildings are the railway administration and the post office. But the fountain in the centre tells quite another story. The Titans holding it up and frowning while they're dribbled on seem to wish they were in Rome's Piazza Navona. A bit further into town, and we're in competition with Venice. There's a very handsome terracotta palazzo over there. I gather that the Grand Canal was created at the behest of Maria Theresia. It's certainly grand, but it seems to lack a basic requirement for a canal. It doesn't go anywhere. It stops dead in front of the Greek Orthodox Church. There are two Orthodox churches in this square, and the other one tells us where we're heading. It's Serbian, and the signs are in Cyrillic, and it's a reminder that Trieste is only by accident attached to Italy. Tito was still trying to reclaim it for Yugoslavia in 1975. If I listen very hard, I can just hear that there's a service on this morning. The grandest place of worship in Trieste, though, is here, in the heart of the city's commercial district. It's the Synagogue, the largest in southern Europe. Rabbi Haddad told me of Trieste's Jewish heritage.
The history of the Jewish community of Trieste goes along with the history of the town of Trieste. It is very interwoven. Actually, what happened was that at a certain time, the empire realized that it needed to have a port. We still have the patents of Maria Teresa that she delivered to the Jewish community of Trieste, and there exist only 4 copies written on parchment, 2 in German, which are all located in the State Archives here in Trieste, and 2 in Italian, which are property of the Jewish community of Trieste. And these are historical documents for very simple reasons, because it states the groundbreaking of the Jewish community of Trieste as a big Jewish community. And it states the birth of the town of Trieste as a growing commerce and port and trade city, along together with the Jewish community. Starting from Maria Teresa, a whole new attitude toward Empire Jews started. And Trieste was the champion of this new attitude. So with the high authorities of the empire, the relationships were very good. I mean, we have records of kosher meals for Jewish soldiers in the Austrian army.
The synagogue is conveniently situated in the same block as one of Trieste's most popular cafes, a great place to do business and catch up on the latest artistic gossip. If you want to get the best of both worlds, drink a cup of Italian coffee in a Viennese coffee house in Trieste. This is the Café San Marco. It was erected, hopefully, in 1914 and partially destroyed in the First World War immediately afterwards. In the 1920s, it was restored to its former glories, complete with bronze ceilings, fin de siècle lamps, and venerable accoutrements. There's a telephone over there from the 1930s, and behind that pillar, there's an equally venerable cash register. I noticed that it was awarded the gold medal of the Society of Viennese Coffee Houses in 1989. But what it's most famous for today is that it functions as the secondary office for Trieste's most celebrated writer. His name is Claudio Magris, and in addition to being a translator of German and a professor of philosophy, he's also a great expert and enthusiast for the culture and ideas of the Habsburg Empire.
Die Grundlage, das Fundament der Österreicher, das heißt der ganzen westlichen Kultur, sucht und es nicht findet.
The fundamental character of Austrian culture can be expressed in the image of the empty theatre box, the emperor's empty theatre box. It was a world which was genuinely like Karl Kraus's metaphor, a weather vane to test world destruction. The world being the totality of life.
In der Architektur, sicher in einem Geist der Triestiner Literatur, vielleicht nicht in der...
The real legacy of the empire lies in the architecture, the literature, its irony and its discomfort.
In der Geschichte, diese Ironie, dieses Gefühl, dass die Realität nur eine zwischen...
With a reality that's only one of a whole number of possibilities. Complexity, skepticism, disenchantment with history, and at the same time, a belief in humanistic values.
Gegenüber der Geschichte und doch mit dem hartnäckigen Glauben an gewissen menschlichen, individuellen, humanistischen Werten.
Trieste is a city of cafes. The most elegant is the Café degli Specchi on the Piazza dell'Unità d'Italia, which was once a watering hole for Habsburg Eurotrash, not to mention James Joyce and Italo Svevo. It faces the harbour and the most elaborate building in town, Lloyd Triestino. It's government offices now, but when it was built, it was a monument to the city's commercial prosperity and the certainty of marine disaster. The opera house across the piazza was built in 1901. It's named after Giuseppe Verdi, who died a month before it opened. It's the only opera house I know actually on the seashore. What a place to stage Verdi's Simon Boccanegra. On the side is a plaque commemorating the hero of one of Trieste's first bids for independence. Well, today the Habsburgs are undoubtedly the bad guys. It's a giorno di festa, National Day. In the Piazza dell'Unità, commemorating the unification of Italy and the liberation from Austrian rule, we have the entire military establishment of Trieste. The army, the navy, the air force, the mountain troops, the Bersaglieri, got up like William Tell, and a very Napoleonic-looking crowd with sabres, tricorns, and dashing red plumes. Half an hour down the coast, beyond the strip of wall and shingle that does service for a beach jammed with topless teenagers, stands Trieste's grandest edifice. And this time, it's as Austro-Hungarian as they come. Up a pine-crowded track, through neatly carved walks and past prim pavilions, sits Miramare, the pleasure palace created by the Kaiser's brother Maximilian. There's a suitably fatuous statue of him as you walk up, lord of all he surveys, and not a lot else. Maximilian laid out Miramare like a cross between a Corinthian Schloss and a miniature cliff-top Schönbrunn above the Adriatic. He even brought earth up here from Austria by train to plant his garden. He crammed the building with stuffy Habsburg furniture, bits of Biedermeier, and all the crowned heads of Europe on the walls, like an imperial football team. It was a family business, the Habsburg Empire, kept afloat not through military conquest, in which Austria had shown a poor run of luck since the Napoleonic Wars, but strategic marriage. And here is Dottoressa Fabiani to show me round this memorial to dynastic aspiration. This was the most important harbour for the empire. Did Miramare have any significance other than a residence? Did it have any military significance?
Nel 1854 diventa appunto contrammiraglio della flotta.
In 1854 he became admiral of the fleet, and he based himself primarily here in Miramare. He was significant in promoting the greatness of the imperial fleet and in securing victory at the Battle of Lissa in 1866 against the Kingdom of Savoy.
Negli occhi di Massimiliano però si intravede un po' di tristezza.
In the eyes of Maximilian, one can see a touch of sadness. He really accepted the Mexican crown with enthusiasm, because he was a liberal individual who wished the best for the Mexican people. But he was unaware of the grave problems there.
In Paris, there's a rather more famous picture of Maximilian 4 years later facing a firing squad. How did it come to be from this enthusiastic and liberal arrival in Mexico? 4 years later, he was standing in front of a row of rifles.
Certamente Massimiliano, quando ha accettato la corona, non credeva che...
Without doubt, Maximilian accepted the crown enthusiastically and didn't realize that his presence was considered alien to the life and aspirations of the Mexican people.
Al mondo, alla vita del Messico.
Miramare is not a lucky place. After Maximilian's premature dispatch, his wife went mad, poor woman, and they had to send her back to Belgium. From that point on, no new furniture was acquired, no new portraits painted. The frame was frozen in 1867. That didn't stop the run of bad luck, though. 40 years later, Miramare was the stopover for Franz Ferdinand, the Kaiser's nephew, on his way to another appointment, with that bullet which was fired from the starter's pistol for the First World War. The bad luck even continued to the Second World War. The German commander here ended up in front of a firing squad. This is the watery western frontier of those southern Slav lands through which so much of the Faultline passes. And that sea out there is a Slavic sea, not an Italian one. I think it's time to follow Franz Ferdinand to the lands where the empire was beginning to dissolve.
Travels in Kakania was written and produced by Dennis Marks, with technical presentation by Tony Wass and Tim Alcock. Faultline is a director's cut production for BBC Radio 3.